In the last video, we put a brand new radium fuel cell in this thing, which is gonna make it way more reliable. It's gonna make the fuel delivery system work a whole lot better, but it's not gonna get us any more power. Today, we're gonna change that. So we've got the fuel cell, we have the pumps, we have bigger AN lines, everything to get more fuel to the engine. But when we put this together, it's got stock LS3 injectors, which currently are operating at about 90% duty cycle, which if you know anything about tuning, is not great. Even if you don't know anything about tuning, something operating at 90% of its threshold means there's really not room for a whole lot more. So it's time that we swap these out. Now, stock LS3 injectors are 42 pound, which equates to about 440 cc's. And it works. They're good for, mid 400 horsepower, maybe 500 if you really want to push them. But keep in mind, that's on pump gas. And the main reason I want to swap these out is because we're converting this car over to E85. That's right, it's time to see if E85 makes a real difference on a pretty basic NA LS setup. That was one of the main reasons I went to a bigger fuel line, and that's the reason we're swapping out to bigger injectors. If you're unfamiliar with E85 or ethanol-based fuel, you need more fuel in the engine to make the same amount of power as you would with regular fuel, which means you need more fuel line, more fuel pump, and more injector. So what's the upside to ethanol? Well, it burns cleaner, it burns cooler, and it burns more efficiently, which all equates to more power. It means you can get a little bit more aggressive with your timing settings, and you can basically just turn the motor up a little bit while it's still staying safe because the fuel burns a bit better. Now, this is really obvious in a turbo car where you can just crank the boost up, get real aggressive with the timing, and make a bunch more power off ethanol. But the question today is how much more power can you make with an NA setup, especially an NA LS? This thing already makes pretty good power, makes good torque. So is there gonna be a big difference switching to ethanol? There's only one way to find out. Now, the other reason I wanna switch over to ethanol is because eventually this thing is gonna get a bit of nitrous thrown at it. And when you combine nitrous and ethanol, you just get more efficiency, which leads to more power gains with the same amount of nitrous. Like I said, ultimately, it's just a bit safer. Now, nitrous isn't something that's gonna happen initially. I don't have everything to set it up right now, and I don't really want to set it up right now because I really wanna see what just switching over to ethanol is gonna do. Once we get that tune dialed in, I get real comfortable with the car with a little bit extra power. Maybe at the end of this season or the start of next season, we can throw some nitrous at this thing and see what it's really capable of. Also, while I'm in here, I decided to go ahead and throw in a fuel pressure sensor. The Holley harness came with a wire for it. I just never had the sensor or the fitting, so now we've got that. The whole time this car was tuned, we were using the fuel pressure regulator and the little manual gauge right there, which works, but there's no way of seeing the fuel pressure in the car on the Holley screen. Now there is. It'll make tuning a little bit easier. It also is a safety precaution because if I ever see fuel pressure drop, I don't want to keep demanding more of the car because if it goes super lean, that is how you can damage a motor pretty catastrophically. So glad to have that wired in place. One more thing checked off the list. They've finally arrived. Injectors I've been waiting for. These are DW 1000cc injectors. Pretty sweet. Let's get them installed. Actually, before we can install them, this is a stock LS3 injector. This is the new DW injector. Now they have the same connection, so I can just plug them in, but you'll see they're not the same size. So this is like stock LS injector height, and then this is most aftermarket injector height, which means we need to space our fuel rail up a little bit higher from where it normally lives. So these brackets are how this fuel rail is mounted to this intake manifold. Thankfully enough, when I bought it, it was sent with multiple. So this is what's in the car, like standard height, and then they have these extended heights. The only downside is I cut these up to use them for something else. Well, I cut one up, I drilled some holes in some other ones. So I'm hoping these will still work, but if I had not modified them like this single one, this would be a pretty straightforward bolt-on affair. So let's get to it. While injector size isn't really a big deal, as you saw, it came with different height mounts for the fuel rail, and most aftermarket fuel rails are going to come with that, or spacers or something to move it, because most aftermarket companies understand that there's a few different general fuel injector sizes. But if you're working on an LS, it is important to see what style connector you have, because there's two main connector styles and you want to make sure it matches up with your harness. They do sell jumper harnesses if you get the wrong one, but it's easier just to order the right one off the bat. In my case, these are EV6 injectors, which is like the same as stock LS3. That's why I got the harness EV6 to begin with, because stock LS3 was a plan. So when I got aftermarket ones, I just made sure I got EV6 injectors. So once we get the bolt-in part done, they just plug right in, easy as that. Our new injectors are in. They're all bolted up. Everything's ready to go. Before we go to the tuners, we're gonna pressure test this and make sure there's no leaks. But that brought me to a little tip that I wanna share, especially when it comes to fuel rails, fuel injectors, and things like that. So your fuel rails are bolted to the intake manifold via some kind of brackets and bolts. In this case, it's this bolt here and then a bolt that goes straight into the intake manifold. Now, why is that important, you ask? Well, those bolts on the fuel rail are the only thing that hold the injector in place. Now, yes, there are O-rings. They kind of seat into the fuel rail and seat into the intake manifold. But remember, they're under pressure, your fuel pressure, which means the bolts that hold the fuel rail in also hold the injectors in place. They kind of squish the injector in between the fuel rail and the intake manifold. The reason I bring this up is because those bolts are very important. Not only do you want to make sure they're tight, I suggest putting a little bit of Loctite on them. That's actually a tip that came from my tuner, who's also worked on a bunch of Formula Drift cars, and we've all seen cars catch on fire, and fuel fires are some of the scariest, and a lot of them are caused by either an injector O-ring failure or one of these bolts back out, and then the fuel pressure will actually cause a small leak, which will shoot fuel into your engine bay, ultimately onto the headers, which will then cause a fire. So pro tip, put a little bit of Loctite on the bolts that hold your fuel rails to the intake manifold and the brackets to the fuel rails themselves. Now let's go get some E85 so we can top this thing off and finally pressure test the whole system. First time putting fuel in the new radium fuel cell. Also first time putting E85 in this car. We just gotta cross our fingers that those fuel lines I made don't leak and that all the AN fittings are nice and tight. But that's why we're checking this stuff before we go to the tuners. I want to pressure test the system, make sure that it builds fuel pressure, holds fuel pressure, and has no leaks, because I don't want to waste the tuner's time. I think the seal on the top of this can is bad because it is leaking. But that's the only leak we have today. I'll take that. Fuel system is good. Car's loaded up in the trailer. It's time to head to the tuners and see what this thing can do. We're back at Hustler Race Engines with Ish, who tuned the car the first time. We're gonna touch up the tune, make some adjustments for E85, bigger injectors, hopefully make a bit more power. Always something, man. We got the car unloaded. I told Ish that it wouldn't start because, you know, new injectors, new fuel, the tune's not right, whatever. So he fixes some stuff on the laptop, thinks, cool, it should fire up, goes to crank it, and the ECU is seeing no RPM, so no crank signal. All right, so he pulls a spare crank sensor out of his truck, swap it out really quick, still no crank signal. So he says, well, maybe that sensor's not good. I don't know, it was just kind of tossed in my truck. So I'm headed to the parts store now to buy a known good part, and then we'll take it from there, I guess. Doesn't matter how prepared you think you are, something always comes up, and that's kind of just the story of cars. So fingers crossed this gets resolved pretty easily, and I guess we'll find out in a few. Trying really hard to just roll with what's going on right now, but we are not having a good time. This car is fighting us every step of the way. First it was a crank no start because of no RPM signal, replaced the crank sensor. Was not the crank sensor, it was actually a faulty oil pressure sensor. Apparently the oil pressure sensor is part of the same circuit as the crank sensor, and they're just all tied together. One goes bad, then the rest lose signal. So unplug the oil pressure sensor, I'll worry about it later. And now we've got RPM, but we have no fuel pressure. Cool, that's a brand new fuel system, and I thought it was building fuel pressure at the house when we tested it, but apparently it was not building enough. Because of the way the radium's set up, we needed to cap a few things off. So pulled the whole thing apart, and now I'm driving to the parts store for the second time in the last 30 minutes to go get some fuel hose. Although today didn't go as planned, I wanted to elaborate on a few things and kind of tell the full story. So obviously the car didn't run when I got there. I thought it was a tuning issue. He was just gonna be able to go in there and fix a couple things. When he got on the laptop, he realized there was no RPM signal, which pointed to a crank sensor, We replaced the crank sensor, still no RPM signal, which then had us testing the circuit, found there was a short in the circuit, but it was the entire circuit, which means fuel pressure, oil pressure, crank sensor, and I think one other sensor. So we started unplugging each one until it worked, found out that the oil pressure sensor was bad. Unplug the oil pressure sensor, just remove it from the circuit entirely, and then we had RPM signal. Once we had RPM signal, the car still wouldn't run because there was no fuel pressure. Now, I tested the fuel system here before we went to the dyno, and there was fuel pressure, but there was only some. It was very low. It was not enough. That was caused by the radium top hat. So that top hat is designed to house 3 pumps. And if you're only running 1 pump, you're supposed to block off the other 2 inlets. What was happening, because I didn't block them off, is fuel was going from the fuel pump in the inlet, and then 2/3 of it was just going out the other ones and back into the tank, and only a little bit of fuel was making it out of the feed line. So we had really low fuel pressure. So we took that apart. I looped the lines together. I guess radium makes a block off for that. So if you are running 1 or 2 pumps, you can block off the ones you're not using. That's my bad. I didn't read the instructions thoroughly enough or didn't find that part. Whatever it was, that's on me. But we fixed all that. Finally got the car started. It was running. By then I had been there for about 2 hours, and Ish had another customer lined up after me, and we were almost cutting into that time. And he thought maybe we can get a quick base tune on it and you can just come back tomorrow and we'll button it up. That's when I found a fuel leak, because now we have full fuel pressure. So a leak that wasn't present when the fuel pressure was too low was now there when the fuel pressures were supposed to be. And it was from one of the AN fittings that I did when I redid the whole fuel system. You may see it, the little plastic sleeve just wasn't properly seated. It kind of folded itself over, created a leak. Not a big deal. But with all of those problems and how long it took to fix them all, Ish decided it was best I bring the car home, fix everything here, make sure it's good, and then go back tomorrow so he can dedicate some real time to tuning it. Because he thought even if we fixed everything and he rushed through a tune just to get it done today, that it wouldn't really be the best product. And there's a chance he may miss something. There's a chance it just may not be as good as it could be. And he didn't want to give me that product. So I'm really appreciative to Ish, his desire to really give me the best car possible, even if it meant me trailering it back home, taking it back apart, throwing it back on the trailer and going back out there tomorrow morning. I really do think it's worth it. And I'm grateful that we ran into all these problems this weekend. As annoying as it is, it would be 100 times more annoying to bring this car to hot pit and then find these issues out. Fingers crossed, everything goes well tomorrow and we're gonna have the best car possible come hot pit next weekend. So next morning, here at the dyno, car's already unloaded, strapped up, bolted up, ready to make some pulls. Nothing but good vibes today. So far, everything's looking good. Fingers crossed we can make a couple pulls, make some power, and leave here with a solid car. All right, we haven't got to any full power pulls yet. He was doing a lot of like load testing where you just load the dyno up, put the car in that power band of where it would be if I was like trying to dig out of the corner or like launch off the line. While we were doing that, we lost fuel pressure. Turns out my quick fix for the radium triple pump setup with that line I looped, it came off because there's no barbs for the lines. It's not really meant for a loose line to be there anyways. So put it back on, crank the hose clamps as tight as they could go. Fingers crossed that lasts the rest of this dyno session, and we'll come up with a real solution when we get home. Fix it before hot pit, I'm not worried about that. But as long as we can get through this dyno session. All right, second pull, we're currently making less than we made on 91. Why do you think that is?
So it could be, different ambient conditions. Right now, we made a pull at 26 degrees, and I'm trying to pull up the graph here to see what was the difference. I don't remember the last run, but okay, here we go. So we went from, we picked up 12 horsepower, and we went up 2 degrees. So we're starting to get to a dwell point where the engine's not going to make any more power. So I'm going to give it another 2 degrees and see how much that benefits us. And then we're going to manipulate that a little bit, leave some cushion to it so it's not running at its peak pressure the whole time, and it'll live for a long time. You can see our target our target air fuel. This is all open loop, so if we do leave it in closed loop, it's got, you know, maybe less than 1% or 1% of correction. So this is all open loop. I purposely leave it a little bit, just a slightly richer on the bottom, just because, you know, it takes longer for the engine to get out of that RPM area, so I leave it just slightly rich, so it doesn't compromise the engine.
So we made about 430 on 91. Do you think we're going to make more than that on E, or do you think we're close to the limit?
Well, we'll see what this next pass does. And again, this was, I think we did this back in April, right? So there could be signs, you know, possible engine wear, degrading. That's what we're probably seeing. I'm gonna say maybe like a 20 horsepower loss, but it could be, you know, different conditions. You know, now we're in summer. You know, conditions are hotter, less air than it was when it was cooler back in April. That could be our answer.
Makes sense. It is like 100 degrees today, and in April it definitely was not.
Yeah.
.407.
Yeah,
You think that's it?
That's our max. So we went up another 2 degrees and only gained about 4 horsepower. So we're to the point where the engine's not really giving us the benefit that we're expecting from a 2 degree change. So typically it's like 20 horsepower, like 10 horsepower per degree. When, you know, once you're out of the engine's timing window, it's like 10 horsepower per degree. So we only gained 4 horsepower on 2 degrees. So we're pretty much done with timing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring it a step down from there, and, you know, hopefully this will live for another for more seasons.
Yeah, that is the most important thing. An extra 20 horsepower is not worth blowing this thing up.
No, it's not. And typically, you know, I'll pull more at peak torque, and I'll leave some, you know, after peak torque. You know, it seems that engines live longer that way. You're not running them at their full potential, you know, at peak VE, so it leaves some cushion.
Would you say there's a benefit to switching to E85, given that we actually lost power if we just compare last dyno graph to this dyno graph?
Well,
it's less, but is there a benefit?
Yeah, it's a benefit because it cools the combustion chambers down, and which allows you to run more ignition timing. And if you had boost, you know, you can run more boost, because the alcohol, it helps cool down the air, and it helps cool down the combustion temperatures. So there's huge benefits from running E85 than running pump gas, for sure.
All right, well, that all sounds like good stuff. Even if the numbers aren't better, they're definitely at least not worse. And
it's hard to make a comparison now because we're a couple of months out from where we initially did it. So you've already ran the engine a couple of times. Was it? No, it wasn't new back then, because you had already ran it. But, you know,
it was a used, unknown condition, like not gonna say junkyard motor, but close to it.
Yeah. So right now, like I said, there's 2 differences. We ran them at a different date, so we don't know what's the difference there, other than, you know, different dates. But everything is basically back to the way it was. The only difference is we're on E85 now.
So after all those upgrades, the car makes less power. Now, as Ish was saying, there's a lot of other variables. It's not like we dynoed this car, drained the fuel, put E85 in it, made some tuning adjustments, and made another hit. We were in 2 completely different seasons. I looked it up. The average weather in April was like 65, maybe 70 degrees at the hottest. And the day that we tuned this now, it was 100 degrees. So just that in itself, 30, 40 degree ambient air temperature difference can make a 4 to 6% difference in power, which would be right in line with the 20 or so horsepower that we lost. Also, as Ish mentioned, it's been half a season, maybe a little bit more than half a season, that we've put on a used motor that I was told had low mileage and was told was in good condition. And yeah, it looked good, but you never really know. And engines do wear out, especially in a sport like drifting, where you are demanding a lot out of an engine and you're really beating the heck out of it. I mean, living on the rev limiter, they're always getting hot. Even if it's not overheating, you're still running it, you know, on the higher end there. So that makes sense too. If we didn't lose all of that 20 horsepower or so due to ambient air temperature, we definitely could have lost some to engine degrading, which is just part of it. I personally never planned on this motor lasting more than this season. As long as it can get me through this whole thing, I'd like to pull it out and do a real build on it for next year. That's another topic. Another variable that we don't know exactly is the fuel I was using. It's just pump E85 from a local gas station by me. I don't have a flex fuel sensor. We didn't measure the ethanol content in the fuel. So I don't know if it's true E85. It could be lower. A lot of times pump E is lower than 85%. He did everything he could do to get the car as good as it can be. And more important than anything is the engine's happy, the car's gonna be reliable, and everything works. Whether it makes 20 extra horsepower or not doesn't really matter if the car doesn't work. So if we've got a solid, reliable car going into hot pit next weekend, I am more than happy regardless of the power numbers. So to wrap this up, if you're considering switching your car to E85, do a dyno session before you do anything. Upgrade your fuel system, put bigger injectors, all that stuff, and then go to the dyno with 91 in it, or 93 or whatever you have. Make a hit, see where the tune's at, see your baseline, and then drain the gas, put E85 in it, change the tune, and then do it back to back. And I think you'll get way better results. I wish we had done that, but with how many changes I made to this car before going to the dyno, it just didn't make sense to do. And I'm sorry, because it would have made it for a better video if I did back-to-back runs like that, but it is what it is. Hopefully this video still sheds some light on some of it. Regardless, I'm happy that I have a strong running and well-tuned car. Because like I said, hot pits next weekend, September 13th, Orange Show Speedway in San Bernardino, California. If you're around, come by. I'll even put a little discount code down below that you guys can use if you want to get your tickets. But that's just in a few days, so I'm going to wrap up some things on this car, and I hope to see you guys there. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.